Hello, everyone, and welcome to Why Distance Learning, the podcast that delves into the transformative power of live virtual learning. Hosted by three seasoned distance learning professionals, myself, Tammy, and Allison. Hello, ladies.
Hi.
Hello.
We bring you interviews with industry experts as we challenge common misconceptions and explore the true impact of distance learning in today's world. This represents a somewhat new direction. I think we're like 3-4 episodes deep now of Tammy, Allison, and I went through and we hammered out this list of perceptions that people developed either before, during, after the pandemic. And some of them, there's truth to them. There are also some like limited understandings that people have of them. Perhaps that was their experience and they've generalized that to the entire distance learning industry. What we seek to do with these interviews is take one of those perceptions and unpack it through the lens of our guest's experience. And that perception today is that students accomplish more in person than online. And our guest is Caleb Smith. Caleb, welcome to the program.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
And maybe you can tell by the sound quality of his microphone, Caleb Smith is a
Yes.
music professional. And so we are going to jump into the idea that students, what they can do online that they can or cannot do in person, how much you can accomplish in this content area that feels like it needs to be very hands-on, very in person. And we're going to unpack all that through your experience. But before we do that, Tammy, could you please introduce Caleb?
I would be happy to. Caleb is a musician and educator with 15 years of experience teaching and 4 years online. He is a strong believer in the value of online education and bringing opportunities to students all over the world who otherwise would not be able to enjoy music. So with that in mind, Caleb, we're glad you're here, but can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you found yourself teaching music online?
Yeah. So one thing I've always loved is, the reason I got into music is the connection aspect. And I love connecting with people. And the reason I got into education was helping other people be able to connect better with the people around them. And I actually did a lot of in-person things. I worked as a musician in the pit of musicals. I've worked in bands, touring around a lot. And with getting into online education, it was kind of an accident, I guess. I was back home and I was asked to play guitar for a virtual meeting with Santa.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So, and then they realized, oh, you can play the guitar. Can you actually teach the guitar online? And it was just like, at first, like we're kind of going to address it's like, well, I don't know if you can learn the guitar online. So it's an interesting challenge. And then that's kind of how I fell into it. And I've really fallen in love with the idea of being able to kind of see education differently as an opportunity for people. So,
Oh,
Oh,
as
I
an
love that. And
opportunity for people. Yes.
yeah.
we
Yes.
talk about opportunity a lot on this program because there is an accessibility component of distance learning that is so much of the value, connecting students, learners to people, places, ideas that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. And the research does show that distance education has been increasingly adopted across various education levels, and it provides these opportunities to students who might otherwise lack that access, especially in specialized subjects like music. So I'm wondering if you can speak to how distance learning has influenced your approach to teaching music and what are the benefits that you've observed in students, especially in places that wouldn't otherwise have access to your type of education.
Right. So it's interesting because when I first started teaching online, I kind of tried to treat it like I would be teaching in person. I was at a slight advantage, I will say, when COVID happened and everyone was moving online because I had actually been teaching English online for the last few years before that. So I was used to this new concept of the 4-second delay between people.
4 seconds. What kind of software are you using?
Well, when you're connecting to Yeah, people's houses in China. It was, it
Yeah.
depends on who you're connecting with.
Problems on their end, definitely on their end.
Yeah. Well, that is interesting because something with online is, yeah, it definitely comes down to the internet connection is too.
Mm,
And so I try and minimize that as much as possible. But something I've changed, one is understanding objectives, right, with education. And if your objective with teaching someone guitar is that they'll be able to do advanced techniques and be able to do everything perfectly as if you were in the same room with them, um, you might have more difficulty.
mm,
But the way I've adjusted my teaching style is I've kind of seen it more as a chance to inspire someone
mm,
and give them access to just trying something or hearing something or being able to talk to someone about something that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise be able to. And you mentioned connecting with rural communities, but it's also, I find it's an issue we kind of run into with music in bigger cities as well, where
yes.
teachers you're trained in one thing and then all of a sudden it's like, go teach music.
Yeah.
And you've never done it before. And so it's kind of an issue across the board in a lot of
Mm,
subjects, not just music. So yeah, I've changed the way I do it in the sense that it's more focused on immersion rather than actual concrete objectives in the same way.
mm.
Hmm.
That's interesting to think about the approach of how you're constructing the objectives, and especially in thinking about how you had to adapt what you were doing in person, not just with objectives, but what about like the engagements for the students? The idea that even in an online experience, there's lots of people that will talk about, well, how do you use certain multimedia? How do you use a little bit of this or that? Is there any way that you use asynchronous or like any supporting materials on top of your live programs? And also with the cool, amazing note you made about educators, I wonder, do you also provide like professional development or ways to support teachers that might be put into those roles?
So while a lot of my time these days have been just kind of trying to keep up with working one-on-one with the classes or anyone, um, I hope to be able to develop materials more and work on, because the support and the opportunity for in the online medium is not just to support education of students, but to be able to support the education of teachers, and kind of like help them with the increasingly difficult task that is set in front of them. Um, and so, yeah, well, I haven't developed anything yet. I'm still working on it. And so, something that has changed slowly over the last 4 years is very much in the side of I have to make sure that all of the tech on my side is working as well as possible. So, for example, I use OBS studios in order to
Ooh,
actually,
nice.
yeah, a tiny plug for them for free, I guess.
Yeah, it's open
And
source. So
yeah, it allows me to be able to show images really big uh, that otherwise would be very difficult. It allows me to zoom in on my hands properly when I'm showing
hmm.
um, complicated things. And yeah, but I think something with online education, maybe this isn't part of the question, but something that I've noticed a lot is it's very dependent on who's on the other side. I think one of the misconceptions with online education is that it's very similar to an in-person guest, uh, where it's very up to the people on the other side how it goes in my experience. Um, and so it's like if there's an engaged teacher on the other side who's able to be like the in-person version of me,
Hmm.
then it can go really great. But if we don't have that, sometimes things get lost in translation virtually.
Interesting. Yeah, I I relate because we do work with students overseas. We're an English program. The local teacher is a native, or a non-native English speaker, same culture as the students we are teaching, and we rely on them heavily for certain cultural understandings, for being just the eyes and ears in the room. That local teacher can be super important in a language acquisition setting, and I think it's interesting that music is its own language acquisition setting, and so that role of the local teacher becomes like that much more important. I'm actually thinking about our episode with Terry Lowry, who had the gig room. I'm not sure if you know about this technology, but it's like a zero latency, like music distance learning tech, where he like did this experiment of like how far do people need to be, how close do people need to be to each other in real space in order to feel like they're playing in time with each other. And it was like
Hmm.
70 feet or something like that. Like that was the maximum amount of space. And then it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, how far does sound travel or sorry, how
Hmm.
long does it take for sound to travel 70 feet? And it's like 30 milliseconds or something like that. And he was like, okay, so that's the latency we're going for, right? We're going for that latency or below. Zoom prioritizes like the
Hmm.
like packet loss, like lack of packet
Hmm.
loss above latency, but the gig room prioritizes that latency. So if that's something you haven't heard of, I think that's something for music distance learning professionals to definitely check out.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking about was a quote of his, which was from this episode that we did with him, which was, "Our primary task is to empower those in front of us to learn, perform whatever we're trying to do. We are there to empower." And I wonder if that resonates with you, because I was hearing that in the story of the local teacher, right? Like, you are not only empowering the students to learn, you're empowering that local teacher to be a better music teacher. I'm wondering if that resonates for you, if that's part of your process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I was talking about this recently. Is like kind of my if I do my job perfectly in my mind, I won't have a job.
Yeah.
In a sense, right? So it's kind of like I'm there to assist where there's need, right? And if eventually you do such a good a job of assisting that they don't need it
I
in
don't
the
think
same
you're
way, then
understanding
it's
this whole
great.
capitalism thing, Caleb.
Yeah.
That's not the point. We don't heal them. We just keep them reliant on our medicine, right?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
just kidding.
No. And that's something I think, like, yeah, it's about that empowering thing, right? I think if that is our objective with online education, right, that's a lot easier of benchmarks, and that's the difficulty also with education at large is benchmarks, right? It's just like, well, how do you have benchmarks on inspiration and
Hmm.
on like, oh, did that like bring joy to them, and did it like kind of those kinds of things, um and so it's hard sometimes to see those and measure them
Hmm.
in a way.
That is a big conversation. I'm not
Yeah,
sure we're
that's a
prepared
different
to.
one.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure we're prepared to. Let's focus on music.
Yes,
Um,
yes, right.
uh, check out my other podcast, Make It Mindful, for deeper conversations about pedagogy. Not that we don't go there, but I do want to talk
No.
about the music part. So, one of the
Hmm.
things with the music in distance education, and with distance education in general, you have this ability to like bridge cultures and to provide uh, access to cultural pieces of culture in a way that is much more real, visceral, live than you would if you were like watching a YouTube video, right? And so when you think about music, I mean, music is literally a part of culture, and then if you break those pieces down, just the exposure to different types of instruments, or different styles of music, you can consider that a student who is engaging in this medium to experience music education is expanding their cultural understanding simply by being there and being exposed to these new pieces of culture. I'm wondering if you can speak to some of that. I'm sure that this has been part of your experience, but like how have you integrated this idea of like cultural understanding, new instruments? How have you spoken to that when you are teaching students from across Canada, from across
And
the
to add
U.S.,
on
from
to
across
that,
the
just
world?
wondering, have you also had a similar experience where you've learned more about your practice or your or musical instruments from those that you're connecting with around the world?
Mm.
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I feel like I'm constantly learning about how music can be used differently from students. But in terms of how kind of like I've used online education and distance learning to show a multitude of cultures or kind of different styles that they wouldn't have heard before. Um, again, I try and go in with this idea of, again, you're just kind of like immersing them in it, not necessarily expecting that they would go on to it. But one of the programs I do is called like music appreciation. And we just kind of, what we do is I get them to just draw pictures based on their emotional response to whatever music I play.
Mm.
And if generally I do like jazz, and sometimes they don't even know what that is, right? So we do 3 different things with jazz, and then we go and do 3 different things of classical, and then we do something, and I'm just like, but wait, how do we have different emotional responses to different styles of music? And it's an interesting, it reveals multiple things with students at different ages. It reveals kind of that not everyone is going to have the same emotional response necessarily to music. And it just kind of like shows them what's out there, and that they can actually, it makes music more approachable for them. And on the flip side, right, with music, um, sometimes, or a lot of times, students don't have the opportunity to be able to, like you're saying, kind of go see an orchestra in person, right? Um, or go see a band in person. Um, and so the one of the opportunities we have with online education is to, one, be able to show those different parts of it, but also be able to demonstrate little parts in between. So one of the things that sometimes orchestras do, they'll do an orchestra petting zoo, they call it, where students can actually walk around and like touch the instrument and stuff like that. And I feel like even students, if you miss that day, right, you miss out on that entire thing. So virtually we can kind of do instrument, they're not petting zoos in the same way,
It's a
but
seeing zoo,
yeah, we can do deeper dives and
zooming in zoo. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it allows them to just ask questions to someone that, even if you did as a school go to see an orchestra, you don't always get to ask the conductor about different parts of the orchestra. Or it can be intimidating when you're in a large crowd of people rather than in your classroom, um,
Mm.
to be able to ask those questions.
I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
just nailed the wordplay. It's actually petting Zoom.
I was sitting here thinking about how you should collaborate with the
Nice.
zoos.
I was a little
Like,
late.
oh my gosh, that would be so fun.
Oh, there you go. And then have different instruments there. Well, actually, there is the carnival of I think that's called the. There's like where
I
each
was
instrument
literally in my
represents a
mind
different
just
animal.
trying to think what
It's Carnival of the
instrument and
Animals. Yeah.
animals go together.
Hmm. Yes, there's like the flamingo. That's the flute. The elephant is. It's all actually
I
major
love
excerpts.
it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But before we started recording today, we got to see some of the amazing ways that you set up your studio, and it's also really wonderful to hear about the different ways that you're inspiring students and immersing them and just introducing them into the musical field and different ways to jump in. But I wonder, what do you see the future of technology being in music education? Do you think it's going to be able to have a more, give music education more of a reach, more of an opportunity to thrive in schools? Or how do you see it being leveraged as a tool?
With technology and music, they very much have gone hand in hand over the years. And one of the biggest things we're running into now is technology is more and more accessible for musicians, which is super awesome. You have like tiny keyboards that you can get in your house. You have the ability to have an interface, right? Which is what we actually use to connect to the microphones. You can have all of that at home. So it also makes it so that we can send all of this stuff to schools. So being able to not only hear higher quality things, but also create higher quality things, is a really exciting opportunity. And with the advent of VR, right? There's so many opportunities there with music, and being able to even bring all of this stuff that I've already been talking about just that much further, to be able to virtually access instruments. And yeah, like even, sometimes the problem is you show a bunch of instruments to a community and they don't even have them. But if you just send a single keyboard now, you can have access to all of those sounds, which is really cool. Yeah.
Very cool. If I'm using AI to help me write a song, am I cheating?
Well, I think it depends on how you use it, right? I think AI across the board. I mean, this is another deep dive that we could go on forever. I don't know if you have a podcast for that.
I do. Yeah. My other podcasts talk about AI a lot, but
well, let's go over there after. But
like
in
second
AI,
plug for Make It Mindful.
there you go. I think AI is a wonderful tool that can be leveraged. But do I think it replaces abilities? No. I think if you know what you're doing in the first place, AI is great. So if you're already a songwriter and you know what you're doing and you run into a rut, I've heard from other songwriters, they'll write a verse and then they'll pop it into AI and be like, okay, well, what's the next verse you think? And then it'll give it something. And then as a songwriter, you're able to edit it. So it kind of speeds up the process, but it doesn't replace the process. So if you just like say, make something up, it'll pop something up. And there's some interesting AI things out there that I don't know. It'll make up some interesting things. But do I think it replaces it? And like even like text to speech stuff, it's like, yeah, great. It doesn't sound very human. It doesn't connect the same.
It's interesting because like, I use AI to help me with writing, a lot of just like business stuff. And it doesn't feel like cheating to me at all. But when you just described that to me, I was like, that's still cheating. And I wonder if it's because it's like music is more like sacred to me. I don't know, but we can move on. One of the questions that we ask everybody on this program is about golden moments, a time when the medium was just vibrating at pure perfection. It accomplished exactly what you were hoping it would. Caleb, can you please share with us a golden moment from your time using distance learning in music education?
Oh man. I feel like there's a few and they kind of happen constantly. And I feel like I am almost like shaken and reawakened every week by my connections with my students. A lot of the students that I work with in Canada are really remote, and sometimes they're in fly-in communities, and sometimes I'm like the only person they see outside of like 40 other people. And so I think I kind of remember what an opportunity it is to be able to connect with them. And whether it's like the teacher saying, this student came to school specifically to meet with you today. And they like they're like struggling with going to school, and they come to like hang out and play guitar for half an hour. Like, I think those are all moments that keep me going. And finding out that I have this little character that I draw on my whiteboard for the kindergartners. And one week, I think it was just last week actually, the teacher was like, look at all the pictures that they drew, the students drew. So it's like knowing that the time I have with the students isn't just within the half hour, 45 minutes, but it keeps going further, whether they're singing my songs that I've been singing with them, or playing the guitar, or using that. I think one student, he wrote his own guitar song and played it for something. So it was kind of like, it's just, yeah, nice to know that the connections keep going. Yeah.
So amazing.
Are all included.
That kid probably used AI.
You know what? But I hope he used AI and then the guitar skills that he already had and make it better.
Yeah, he didn't replace, he just augmented by replacing part of the process. Yeah.
The human technology connection.
Yes, exactly.
Allison, did you want to do the YDL question?
So that we actually always like as the final question of the podcast is to ask our question, our name, our title, why distance learning. So the reason we ask why distance learning is because we always are interested in thinking about how individuals might have some misconceptions about distance learning. And for you, having experienced it as an educator and having so many different opportunities to learn and also share your expertise as you shared here today, why do you think distance learning is an important medium in education?
And I would also add to that, the reason the podcast is called this is because it is a question that Allison, Tammy, and I have been asked multiple times over the course of our 15, 20-year careers of, okay, cool, but like, why are you doing this via distance learning? Why don't you just come here in person? Right. So that's the nature. That's how the title came about. And that is, I mean, naturally, when your podcast title is a question, you got to ask it every time. Right.
Absolutely.
So here we go.
Absolutely. Excellent. So for me, why distance learning comes down to the fact of how I kind of grew up. I grew up in a relatively small city of around 50,000 people. And we were about 3.5 to 4 hours from Toronto or from Ottawa. And one of the biggest problems that I ran into is, in order to get that next level of education or that next level of information, you had to go to the big cities. And I think distance learning really kind of levels the playing field in a sense. It allows students to have access to people that wouldn't necessarily be able to reach them otherwise. Like the question was asked, why wouldn't you just go and meet them? It's like, well, I feel like even if I was constantly on tour, I wouldn't be able to reach the amount of students I have in this way. And another thing is distance learning allows us to still be as close as possible to in-person. This is different from a YouTube video in the fact that students can actually ask questions. They can have feedback. Teachers can kind of bounce things off. It allows us to, if a student's struggling, then we can pivot still like we would in person, but through online. Yeah, and it's different from being in person. I think that's something that's super important to recognize, is that I know people compare being in person versus being virtual, and why one or why the other is an interesting question, because yes, both is my answer. It's like, well, I don't think you should not take guitar lessons in person if you can, or I don't think you should not go and see a band live if you can. But it's more of like, I think the question of like, why do we have online might come from a place of, well, if you have access to everything, great, But
Mm.
if you don't, then that's why.
Of course. Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yes.
Well said. I have one last question, and it's just for me, which is
Sure.
you said you were in Pitts.
Yeah.
What's your favorite musical?
What's my favorite
Good
musical?
question.
Yeah.
My favorite musical to play
Oh,
that I've had a chance to play was Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh yes!
cool! Yay!
I have a
Yeah.
tattoo of the plant. from
No,
Ah!
Audrey too. I played Orin Scrivello DDS in college.
Nice.
That was my like big breakout musical role. So
I'm glad I
was
picked the right one.
I was waiting for Little Shop. I was waiting for you to say Little Shop. It's so
Yes,
fun. Music's so good.
we for my experience playing it, we were on stage, and apparently
Yeah.
it was like a second show of it because I just like I love playing musicals because they're so unapologetically cheesy and they just like breeze through genres. So you'll just like the bass lines are always where the most cheese is, and it's just like I would be laughing the entire time and then crying, and also so it's a whole other thing. Yeah.
Suddenly
it
see
was
one.
fun.
Can I add on one more
Yes.
question?
Yeah,
What
please.
is your favorite instrument to teach online? And does that differ from what you like to teach in person and play?
My favorite instrument to teach online? I do really like teaching ukulele in person. Or online, sorry. Allow that. My favorite instrument to teach online, it would be the ukulele. It's just because of its simplicity, in a sense, right? It's relatively small. It's relatively accessible, and it's usually only one finger at a time,
Yeah,
which is nice.
fits beautifully in the frame.
Yes, it does. I was
Yeah,
just thinking that.
right? Yeah, but I mean, you have multiple tools to be able to fit other things in and out of frame. But yeah, and I think although I do love teaching guitar and I do love singing, and it's just kind of like I've never actually taught anyone upright bass online.
But it's right there
yet.
in your background so prominently.
I know.
So beautiful.
Yeah, it's my main instrument,
Oh, cool.
actually. So that's why it hangs out back there. In hopes that
Awesome.
one day someone will be like, "Teach me that."
Yes.
Maybe. Yeah.
Teach me that, Caleb. Teach me that.
Yeah. You know what? That's actually how I started playing upright bass. I was learning violin, and my teacher had his bass in the room. I was like,
That one's
That's it.
bigger.
That's what I want.
Exactly. Yeah, and then I went to university for it. So
That's
great.
awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Caleb, thank you so much for being here. Allison and I each got a bonus question. Tammy, do you have a bonus question you want before we go?
No, you guys covered the good ones, like instrument and musical and all that. So got it covered for me.
Awesome. Well, for our listeners, if you check out the show notes, we'll have them on cilc.org/podcast if you want more episodes and more information about the podcast. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Lucas Salazar. If you want to support the podcast, please rate it, leave us a review, tell a friend, follow us. And if you're curious about the realities behind the perceptions of distance learning, stay tuned to the voices we highlight on this podcast. These are the innovators and educators proving what's possible in live virtual learning, challenging misconceptions, and transforming education along the way. Why distance learning? Because it's evolving, impactful, and here to stay. See you next time.
Bye.